Welcome back, everyone, to Buying Local. I'm your host, Mike Nelson from 5 Towers Media. Joined today here by Tandi Orluk. Mm-hmm. Hopefully I didn't butcher your last name, Tandi.
You didn't.
Perfect. I have my moments. Every once in a while I get someone's name right. Most of the time I end up messing it up. And you are with Set Free Counseling.
Yes.
And based, well, I don't even want to say based. I mean, you live in the, great, let's say the Saratoga region. Mm-hmm. But you do a lot of your stuff virtual, so I don't want to say based because can you work with anyone in the country or just New York State, or how does that licensing work?
Yeah, so I am licensed in Kentucky and New York, so I can see anybody in the state of Kentucky and anybody in the state of New York.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. And
yeah.
If you're listening or watching for that matter, you can hear the charming Southern drawl that you have. I always wish I had that accent. I just always wish I grew up in the South so I could talk like that.
It is very unique, isn't it?
Well,
yeah.
The joke I used to use when I was in the public speaking circuit was that you can say anything you want if you have a Southern drawl and end it with bless your heart.
Yeah, I was going to say. That's exactly what I was going to say is bless your heart.
Bless your heart. You could be like, darling, that is the ugliest sweater. Bless your heart. And
That's
it's like,
it.
and you're like, you just insulted that person, but it was okay.
That's right. We do kind of have that snottiness.
Oh, well, maybe in my next life. So Tandi, I know we've got a few things to talk about. I mean, one of the things we wanted to do was just kind of introduce you to some of our listeners that maybe they haven't heard about Set Free Counseling before. And so probably what we should do is, I know we want to talk about what you do and how you help people, but maybe let's back it up a little bit because you've got a great background. You've been in I guess it's called the mental health profession for a long time and did some great work at the VA. So why don't you back it up and just tell us a little bit about you and your story?
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah. So undergrad, I graduated from the University of Kentucky. And then I graduated from the University of Louisville with a master's degree in 2007. So I have been practicing clinician since then. When I came out of grad school, I worked in community mental health. And that is where we always say you get baptized by fire, right? Mm-hmm. Like in who you see, because it is everything. It really set me up to be a good clinician because I started literally one of my first cases was a lady who was, unfortunately, like very mentally ill and bipolar. And then I saw, people with DID, which is what used to be multiple personality disorder. And I'm like coming right out of school and I'm like sitting in this chair and these people are really sick, right?
That must be wild.
Oh man, it was quite the experience, right?
Yeah.
Like sitting there and you're just like, I don't know what to do. The good thing is that we're under supervision, like on our clinical license there's so many hours. And so I had some really great mentors, right? And clinical supervisors that really were there for me, that even in the middle of a session, I could say, hold on just a second, run down the hall and be like, okay, this is a scenario. What do I do? Right. And so, but I just learned, right? The more I did that, the more immersed I was. And like I said, like that type of community mental health center, it just really set me up to be a great clinician because I saw everything.
What is it like to work with someone who has multiple, I mean, because, obviously we see the TV version of that. And like, it seems wild, right? I mean, is it like legit? Like they're different people, sometimes different names. Like, is that really what it's like?
Well, yes and no, right? Like it's unique to each person. Some clinicians don't even believe in it, right? But I do because I've seen it.
Yeah.
But it's rare. I mean, very rare.
That was going to be my other question.
Yeah, it's really rooted out of tremendous trauma. Right. Yeah. And really, at the end of the day, most mental health disorders are rooted from trauma.
Yeah.
Right. Not all, but most. Some are genetic and, different things. But most are
It's
really
not that we're
rooted.
all fundamentally broken. It's that there's like something happens.
We've been in the world, right? And these things have occurred. But so, I worked with kids. I worked with families during that time. And then I went on to the VA. I worked at the VA for over 10 years, so over a decade, and I worked with homeless veterans. And I have to say that there are moments I still really miss that, right?
Yeah.
Like it was, I literally walked on the streets with them. I went to the homeless shelters every week. You know, I would sit and have meals with them, like at the places that would provide food. And really it took just that consistency, right, of veterans seeing me coming to these places week after week after week, because, you know, in the veteran community, a lot of people are skittish about the VA. Like they don't want anything to do with the VA, right? Like, so but
Why
they
is
saw
that?
me. Well, a bunch of reasons. I mean, there's a multitude of reasons, but mostly I think it's out of fear, because it's a government-based organization. And so they don't want people to know maybe what their struggles are or what's going on. And in this particular population working with the homeless, they were used to being dumped on.
Yeah.
Right? Like, are you really going to be able to help me, Tandi? Is there really something you can do? Right?
They just kind of give up on hope. And
Yeah.
sad.
So, but in that consistency, right? Like, they saw that I was there and that I could actually offer them some help. And it started slow, right? They started to get to know me. This is when I first started there. And then, like, it's like, oh, my name was out through the whole homeless community, right? Like, and they started to get help, right? I saw people get health care. I helped people get a place to live. That was my main role, is to get people into stable housing, right? And so
Can you just not to interrupt, but
Yeah,
I just
please.
On that train. I mean, it's something that we hear so much of with the homeless veteran population and trying to get them housing. I mean, what's like the disconnect? I maybe it's because I'm just so far removed, but I have such a hard time understanding why we have such a huge population of veterans that are homeless.
Yeah. So a lot of it is mental illness and substance use. At the end of the day, those are the two things,
Yeah.
right? But within saying that, I was trying to think when it was. I guess in somewhere after 2008, right? Because this is when Obama became president. He had put out a mandate that there would be no more homeless veterans, right? Now, obviously, we know that that's not realistic in the sense there's always going to be homeless people, there's always going to be homeless veterans, but the mandate really was looking at how can we get each community across the nation a system in place to where we can identify if a homeless veteran enters into our town, right? And then we can fast track them into services, surround them with supportive services, mental health and housing and, you know, all of those things. And the VA had all those programs that we could do that. But basically my role there was community outreach. Like I was the one in charge for the homeless program for community outreach. And so I networked, right, with all the different community partners that also worked with homeless people. And so we would have meetings every month. We would, you know, work on a system. There was like, and, you know, it gets technical, like it was called like a home system. And like, that was just the database basically of how we could identify. And so by understanding who everybody was in the community, we all worked really well together, right? Which was great, because I don't know that this was the case across the nation. This was back in Kentucky. So anyway, we actually, in Lexington, we actually got to what they called functional zero, which meant that was just a government term, right?
Yeah.
Like, but it meant that Lexington was deemed like successful, right? And being able to identify and successfully house those veterans, right, within the whole community with us working together. And so that was really cool, right? Like people from Washington came down and I was one of the representatives there talking to them, right, saying, hey, this is our system, right, that we've put into place. So it was a lot of hard work, you know, but we all worked well together as the community and we got it. We got the goal again. Let's get these people off the street and housed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's, I don't know. It sounds very amazing, the work that you're doing. Also, at the same time, very, I don't know, scary that it's just such a huge problem, you know? But
Yeah,
it's
but
not
there's
a new
systems.
problem.
But the thing is, and this is what I tell people all the time, honestly, veterans have a lot more resources than civilians, especially even when it comes to homelessness, right? Like, so, you know, they have the ability to have some good resources wrapped around them, right? Which is a blessing for the veteran, as it should be, right? But you know, on the civilian side of things, it is harder. That is where a lot of your homeless you'll actually see, is because there's really not resources to house them. There's resources to feed them, or you know, here's some clothing, but they don't have a housing piece really across the nation.
Kind of changes community to community. Some do better, some
That's
don't.
exactly right. Yeah.
So, what made you transition out of the VA, and then why the hell did you move to New York?
No doubt, everybody asks me that all the time. Even like in the store, right? Like, why are you here? Why would you move from Kentucky, right?
I also have to say too, it made me laugh when you said Louisville, because I'm from New York, so I say Louisville.
Yeah, right.
And everyone from Louisville. I can't even say it. Louisville.
You got it. That's it.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So my husband's a veteran. He is a Marine Corps veteran, and his dad is a Navy corpsman veteran from Vietnam. And he became ill with Association of Agent Orange. And so my husband and I had a lot of conversation, and we decided that it would be best to move from Kentucky up here closer to his family. So that is why we're here. And I did transfer from the VA in Kentucky up to the Albany VA.
Oh, you did?
I did. I worked there for 6 months. It was just a different culture, right? Like than what I was used to. And all VAs are ran different.
Yeah.
And so they they wanted me to see veterans in 30 minutes. Well, that's not enough time, you know? Like, so there was just some restrictions there that ethically for me, I just couldn't work around. So I left, and Set Free Counseling this is how it really got started, right? Like, my goal, even from a little girl, was to always be a therapist and have my own practice.
Really?
Yeah. I've never wavered from that. I do believe that's just what God implanted in me. And you know, I've always been a peacemaker. Like, if I think back in school, like even high school or different things, and my friends or whatever, I just kind of wanted, like, if they were fighting, you know, like, come on, guys, can't we see each other's side and get along? You know what I mean?
Are you a middle child?
No, I'm the oldest.
You're the oldest? You're firstborn?
I am firstborn.
Wow.
Yeah, I have a younger brother. He's about 6.5 years younger than me.
No kidding.
Yeah. So I don't know where I was going with that. Here goes
I'm
my
sorry,
ADHD.
I don't know. Same. I'm constantly going down different directions. But you were talking about what brought you.
Yeah, moving here. So that's why we're here. I left the VA. That was a big leap of faith, right? Like, oh my gosh, like I get compensated well, and we literally just bought a house. I mean, like all the things, right? But I became really sick. I have a lot of health trouble, and I've always had a lot of different health issues. And I became really, really sick to where the doctor was like, Tandi, you need a break. Like, she put me on FMLA, and like just kind of through that whole thing at the VA, I decided to leave. I talked to my husband, talked to my family, and it's like, is this going to be okay? You know, it's going to be rough. It's going to be rough, right?
Yeah.
Because we didn't plan for me. Even though the plan all along was for me to have my own private practice, this was not planned in the timing, right? I just became so ill that I couldn't function for a little bit, and I just needed to let my body heal. So then I started to build Set Free Counseling up from the ground up. And so that's been about 2.5 years that I've been working on that.
Not an easy thing building a business from the ground up.
No. It isn't.
Especially in the state of New York. And I don't say that to bash the state of New York and their elected officials, but just for whatever reason with the different regulations and all the different things we have going on in New York I talk about it all the time, but if you can run a business successfully in New York, you can do it anywhere. It is, I don't want to say that it's malicious, but it's just it all sounds like the things they're doing are for the benefit of people, but they make it really hard.
They make it really hard because that, I was able to get reciprocity with my license, my
nice.
clinical license, only because their requirement, you have to have been in an agency for 10 years. Well, thank God I had been at the VA in Kentucky literally like 10 years and a few months, right? Like, so that worked out. So I was able to get that reciprocity. And then trying to get set-free counseling, they wanted it a PLLC. Couldn't be an LLC, right?
Yeah.
Like, so then I had to jump through those hoops. And then it took about a year, literally a year. I had to contact the Congress people, like our representative, right? Because I couldn't get anybody in where I was sending the documents to respond back to me. And so like to what you're saying, they made it really difficult, right?
Yeah, and it's just a function of bureaucracy and so many rules and regulations that are put in place. I don't want to say unnecessarily, but in some cases they're putting in rules and regulations based on only a few instances of something happening, and the next thing you know, there's legislation on it, and it's affecting a huge population and negatively impacting. That's it. Taking it that long.
Yeah.
Just think about the number of people that you're not able to serve and help in that time period just because of paperwork and ridiculousness.
That's exactly what it was.
It is mind-blowing to me sometimes. So.
I'm just thankful that piece is done because I was pulling my hair out.
Welcome to New York.
Right. That's what everybody was telling me too, right?
Oh, man.
Yeah, totally.
That is something. Well, so you're up and running.
Yeah.
2.5 years.
Yeah.
Tell us, before we kind of get into talking about the counseling and what you do and who you work with, just tell us a little bit of the experience about what it's been like for you to build a business from scratch.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think a lot of people understand that.
It is not for the faint of heart, is what I always say, right? Like, it is very difficult. Again, it began with trying to get my license and trying to get all the documentation that I needed to legally be able to practice in the state of New York. And then how do you, like, I moved up here from Kentucky. I don't know anybody except my husband's family, right? And what do I do? Like, how do I figure this out? And so my great hairdresser she's the very first person that I met. Her name, I was going to say,
you got to give her a shout out.
Don't you worry. So Autumn Wright, right, with Serafina Divine Beauty.
And we love Autumn.
Oh, yes. So I actually met Autumn. She was one of the first people I ever met when I moved here, because obviously a girl's got to get her hair done, right?
Yeah.
Like, so I was looking up, like, not knowing the area or anything. The great thing about her is that she has those before and after pictures, a ton of them, right? And I'm like, all right. And then I saw that she was a female Marine, right? And I'm like, oh,
yeah, she's a badass.
Right. That is exactly right. My husband's a Marine, right? Like, he goes to her now too, right? Like, and I'm like, that's who I'm going to go see. So Autumn started, I was telling Autumn all the things that was going on, and she's like, man, I'm in this business group, right? Like, you really need to come. And at that time, it took about a year before I managed to get into the business group, just because I was dealing with my own mental health stuff, right?
Yeah.
Like, and physical stuff. And I said, Autumn, as soon as I'm ready, I'm there, right? And so she would just encourage me, like, every 6 weeks when I see her, right? Like, and then finally I was able, I joined. It's been this June will be 2 years that I've been in the Gold Star group. Yeah. And then, of course, I met all these great people, right?
Yeah.
Like, so these, you all in this group and Gold Star are the first people I know outside of my husband's family, right? Like, so to me, it's so huge, right? And an honor to know you guys, because you all have really helped set me up for success. And so I appreciate you for having me here today too, like, in all the things, right? Everybody in our group. And so again, going back to the, trying to start a business. So that's what I did. Join that networking group, right? Like, I've got to meet some people. I've got to figure this out. And so since starting the group, right, Chris Lusinger, right? Yeah. Working with him through the fire department.
Minds tutoring.
That's it, Nourishing Minds. But I work with him through the fire department role, right?
Yeah.
So he got with me almost immediately, right? Coming and was like, man, I've been looking for a therapist, right? Like, I really want to help my guys out with this, and which is fantastic. And and not the norm, right now. And with first responders, it's kind of, suck it up and deal with it mentality, right?
Which again is staggering and mind-blowing. The things that those folks see
I'm telling
and
you.
deal with. I could never do it. I've said this, that Chris has been on the podcast a couple times, and they're, Nourishing Minds is one of our community partners, and I can't, every time I see him, I'm just like, I don't know how you guys do it. Like, especially when it comes down to working on kids in those situations that they're in. I wouldn't be able to do it. I would never sleep again.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine the struggles that those folks have with, because of what they see and experience, and
it's traumatic.
Traumatic.
Very much so. Yeah. So my role with them has kind of been educating them on that. Right?
Yeah.
Educating them, giving them resources, just being there for them. Right? And it's been really good. A very good collaboration. And my hope is that I can slowly start educating other ones, other fire departments, other first responders. But again, that's a tougher one to crack, right? Like working with veterans, I can sit down with them. They'll tell me their whole life story immediately. Right? It's just a different breed, right?
Yeah.
Like, but I'm learning as I go, and just trying to be there to support them, right? That's kind of been my main thing. So that happened, right, which was fantastic, and just kind of growing that way. And I've also been working with Karen with Ruby Red Road.
Nice.
Yeah, she's been helping me a little bit with the business aspect, because here's my problem is I'm a social worker, right? Licensed clinical social worker, and I know money is hard for people. So when I have clients, I'm like, sure, I can do a sliding scale fee, right? Like, sure, I can do this. But then it's like, oh, I can't pay my bills. I can't eat, and literally. And so she's
I feel like people that have that caregiver archetype, as Karen would call it, often have head trash about the money part of it.
Yeah, it's hard.
It is hard because it's like you don't want money to get in the way of someone getting help.
That's it.
But at the same time, you can't continue to do the work that you're doing and help people if you are not able to survive financially. It's really tough, and I think that's we struggle with it just as a marketing company.
Yeah.
Because it's like, hey, we want money is definitely the gas. I say this all the time. It's the gas that makes the bus go down the road.
Yeah.
But I don't want someone to not have a seat on the bus because they don't have money. So it's like, it was a driving force for us to do this podcast, a driving force for us to get into the print products that we have, to be able to, sing the praise and educate people on local businesses and local business owners, and celebrate the things that they're doing, because it's like, we don't, you're not paying to be here. We don't charge people to write stories on them, and we wouldn't, as a rule. And so it's hard. Money is a hard head trashy thing for business owners. It's tough.
I don't have that piece of like, this is the way it is. So she's been kind of helping me look at that, right? Like, so I'm learning as I go, right? And the thing is, I was saying to a client earlier, I was like, I can't fail. Because if I fail, then what, right? You can't. I have to keep going. I just face that adversity one day at a time, really, which is also what I talk to my clients about. Just let's focus on today. And if we got what we need today, then we can focus on the next day. That's kind of where I am, at least in the business aspect. My goal, obviously, is that won't have to be, and then I can make some longer term plans, right? But that's where I am right now, because again, it's the reality of starting, right? A business.
I often liken small business ownership and entrepreneurship into jumping out of a plane and then packing your parachute while you're falling, and then putting it on and pulling the cord to slow your descent,
100%.
right? Like,
as much stress and
God.
not preparation to do it, and let's just fly out of that plane. I'm right with you.
Yeah. And it doesn't go away.
Yeah.
I've been in this industry and doing what I'm doing for 10 years now. And it's still, I'm still jumping out of that plane every damn day.
I hear you.
Woo,
a day by day, right?
Yeah. You always think that it's going to level off at some point and it's going to slow down, but no, it's just you solve a set of problems, kind of like you're saying, right? You get through the day, and then there's a whole new day and a whole new set of problems that you gotta, and it's just, and if you stop working on the problems you already solved, they'll rear their ugly head back.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's, I don't think people understand. A lot of people that if people aren't business owners or entrepreneurs, I don't think they understand the toll that it can take on you physically, emotionally,
mentally, all of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just, it's rough.
It is rough. You know, I say good days and bad days, right? Like, so today's a good day.
Today's a good day. That's great.
Yeah.
So with your background, tell us a little bit about obviously you can't, for HEPA reasons, right? You can't talk about who you work with specifically on an individual basis, but you have the VA background. Are you still working with vets at all?
I mean, I have some individual clients that are veterans, right? Yeah.
But it's not
but it's not through the VA.
A focus for you as a practice.
Yeah. So, well, my focus is trauma, right? So I'm trained in the top modality in the world. It's recognized by the World Health Organization as the top treatment for trauma, and that's EMDR.
Yeah, you mentioned that before.
Yeah.
You're gonna tell me, or tell us for that matter, your EMDR story.
Yeah, so that's eye movement desensitization reprocessing. It's a mouthful, right? Like it is a mouthful. But basically it is treatment for trauma, right? And I think I mentioned this earlier, but there's really not a person on the planet that doesn't have some sort of trauma.
Sure.
Right? We talk about in trauma treatment, there's big T's and little T traumas, right? Like a big T trauma would be like you were in a horrific car wreck, right? It was one event, right? And so not everybody has a big T trauma. But little T traumas, those are the things that we don't even realize sometimes are traumatic. But what happens in the way the brain and the body works, and I'm real big into neuroscience and different things too, is that those little T's and big T too, but they start to get stuck in the body and in the brain, right? And we know now too that trauma can rewire our brain. So there's a lot of like neuroscience stuff that's going on, right? When trauma happens, and we don't even know it.
Yeah.
Sometimes we don't. Or we're like, oh, well, my trauma is not... like, for example, let me say this. Like, when I would work with veterans, well, I didn't go to war, so I'm not worthy of coming here, right? Like, but they still had trauma stuff happen, you know, stateside, right? And you know, so people do that even in the civilian sense, right? Like, well, I didn't have this happen, right? This horrific thing happened, so it's not traumatic. But it is. Your body and your mind are saying, it is traumatic, right? And so all that to say, right, EMDR is basically what it does is pretty cool, right? Like it mimics REM sleep. So our body was designed for REM sleep to heal and restore the mind. And when I always say the body, I mean the nervous system, right? But we can't control if we go into REM sleep, right? Like we can try to have good sleep habits, but even then we can't make ourselves go into REM sleep, right? And of course the world and the stress and all the things that most people encounter, they don't get good sleep anyway.
I haven't slept good in years.
Exactly my point, right? So what happens is the mind and the body are not restoring. They're not healing. And so that's what I was saying, those big T and little T traumas, they start stacking up in the mind and in the nervous system. And so EMDR is designed, right, to mimic REM sleep. And it depends on who your therapist is for EMDR. Some of them literally still use their finger for like the back and forth with the eye movement.
That's what I was going to ask. Is there like a thing that you like? What does that look like?
So, but for me, and especially because I do it telehealth mostly, it is a specific spot on the body, which is on your arms, that I would walk you through, and it's tapping. But that tapping mimics REM sleep.
Interesting.
Right? And so you could even feel like that rapid eye movement when we're doing it, like when we're processing EMDR just through the tapping, like you can feel your eyes, right? And so what I have found in EMDR, not only is it recognized by the World Health Organization as the top treatment of trauma, I watch people get better, and I watch them get better fast, right? My thing is, I don't want you in therapy forever. Why would anybody want to be in therapy forever, right? Like, I want you out living your life. I want you to experience peace, joy, happiness, right? Like, yes, is the world and bad things still going to happen? Of course they are. But your nervous system and your body doesn't have to react with such intense emotions all the time, right? Like we can really heal that nervous system to where you're not triggered anymore. Even if something bad happens, you're able to just look at it for the situation that it is, right? And be able to process and function and do what you need to do, right? We're always going to have sadness and, things that upset us and, all of that, because those are natural emotions. But the difference, what happens in trauma is those emotions, those big T's and little T's stack up. And so the body, when it gets triggered, you feel so intense. Like you feel those sensations that happen in the body, right? Like maybe your breathing changes, your heart starts beating out of your chest, your hands get sweaty, or you're clenched everywhere, or you're tight, or you're tense, or you're sick to your stomach, right? There's so many physical symptoms that are occurring. And then when that's happening, the brain is saying, oh, I'm not good enough, or oh, I'm unlovable, or oh, I'm, you know what I mean? Like there's all these negative thoughts going. And so EMDR takes that away, right? Because it's healing out whatever is stuck, those memories or incidents, and it works to process them over to where, for example, if I'm operating or I get triggered by something somebody did, and it always goes back to like, oh, I'm unworthy, for example. Well, when we do EMDR, they are going to start operating from I am worthy. And literally the way the brain works, the brain does all the work. It's fascinating.
It is fascinating.
It is so fascinating. So, yeah, I'm kind of rambling on here, but...
No, you're fine.
Yeah.
And you mentioned tapping in there.
Yeah.
Which I've had a little experience with tapping over the years. Knew a couple practitioners. I did one session with someone one time. It was 15 years ago.
Yeah.
I don't think I was quite as open-minded back then as I am now. It seemed a little too woo for me. But it does seem to keep coming back up, though. I keep reading things about it. I see more and more information. They're doing actual studies on it and its effectiveness. And then you're talking about that with EMDR. So do you employ tapping outside of the EMDR? Like they have the forehead and the lip and then the whole deal.
No.
Like you don't get into that stuff.
No, EMDR. Like I literally do the protocol because that's what's researched and evidence based, right? Like, and that's two different sets of tapping. One that the client would do on their own, which emphasizes, we call it safe, calm place, but that emphasizes peace, calm, relaxation. That's communicating to the body, hey, it's okay to be peaceful, calm, restful, right? Like, because most people are not walking around with their nervous system feeling peaceful. Yeah. Right? It's very dysregulated. So there's a certain spot, we call it the butterfly tap, and I would teach somebody that, and they can do that on their own. That is their coping skill, one of them for EMDR.
So like when they start to feel triggers happening, do they start to do that?
And they've already created, in therapy, this safe, calm place, like this kind of guided imagery, visual place that's associated with it. And the tapping in this particular spot, that is what, like I said, it enhances, it communicates to the body, the nervous system, hey, peace, calm, relaxation, right? Yeah. So then when we process, though, that is something they don't do on their own because there's a certain amount of taps and different things that go behind it that I'm doing they don't see.
When you say process?
Right? Yeah, I call it processing, right? Like when we're actually processing a specific memory.
Oh, so you're talking it through and then you're using the tapping when they start to feel uneasy? No,
actually it's a protocol, right? Like, so I walk them through like, what was the scenario? What was the worst part? What was that negative cognition you believed about yourself in that moment? And I help them identify that, and just an example, I'm not good enough. That's a big common one for a lot of people, right?
It's interesting that is so common.
Oh.
Why is that?
Well, this is what I say, and I go over this with all my clients. Everything goes back to childhood. Yeah. Everything does. For the most part, unless it was a big T trauma that happened later. But even then, there's still little T's that happened prior to that, right? Like little T traumas. But so I go over attachment theory. After I've kind of built rapport with a client, I go into attachment theory and I start talking about the 4 different types of attachment. with clients.
What are the 4 different types?
Yeah,
Sorry,
so
I'm so
I love it.
fascinated by this.
Yeah. So there's secure attachment. And I say nobody in the world comes out of childhood with 100% secure attachment. Why? Because we're raised by human beings and we're all imperfect, right? We're going to make mistakes, right? And that's clear. It's obvious, right? So that's secure. But a lot of us would come out with a lot of secure attachment, depending.
And so that means that they're pretty self-assured and pretty confident.
You got it. So as an adult, like able to handle conflict, very confident, right? Like just kind of that how it looks as an adult, right?
What does it look like if you lack it?
Okay, so then it goes into anxious attachment.
Okay.
All right, so that's the second one. And anxious attachment is more like, parents, this is pretty typical, anxious attachment. I have anxious attachment. Most people probably have some form of anxious attachment. But basically what it means is that as a child, the caregivers would be maybe showing their anxiety themselves, right? And as a child, you don't know how to externalize. The only thing because you're not old enough, your brain's not developed, none of that. So the only thing you know how to do is internalize. So that's where those negative cognitions get in place. So let's just say for an example, right? You go to mom, right? And today she's loving, you're crying, maybe you fell down, hurt your knee, whatever, right? Like, and you go to mom, she's loving, or you go to dad and he's loving, right? But let's say a week later, you go and scrape your elbow, right? These are just off the top of my head examples, right? So then you go to mom, but mom's had a really stressful day, right? So mom's like, oh, you're okay. Go put a Band-Aid on yourself, right?
Rub
like
some
just
dirt on it.
Yeah. You're fine. Just kind of like invalidating a bit to a child, right? And then, or dad, either way.
Because they wanted the loving response they got the last time. This time they're not getting it.
And so that's inconsistent, right?
Okay.
There's a bit of inconsistency there. And so what that looks like as an adult, right, would be needing reassurance in relationships. Are you sure you love me? Right? Like that kind of thing. Like, or just a lack of self-confidence, right? Just feeling anxious and not feeling like you can do what you need to do, right? So that would be anxious attachment. Okay. And then you go to avoidant attachment. So avoidant attachment is usually when you grow up and one or both, it just depends on your childhood of the guardians, of the parents, they would totally dismiss your emotions. So you come in crying after scraping your knee. Oh, shut up, or I'll give you something to cry about.
Wow.
Right? You know what I'm saying? Like that type of responses, right, from a caregiver. So they're basically saying you can't show emotion. Don't show emotion. Right? So that looks like an adult, like there's this wall. I say there's this wall up, right? And so you don't let people in and you don't give too much of yourself to somebody else either, right? So there's this avoidance, right? And so there's really never good relationships. There's conflict that arises from that, right?
Yeah.
So that's avoidant attachment, right? And these are brief scenarios.
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
I'm giving you the scale back, right? So, and then the last one is called disorganized attachment. And basically what that is a mixture of the anxious and avoidant. But I always say it's the worst, meaning childhood, there was either full-on physical, emotional, or mental abuse, right? Like it was a very rough childhood. And, let's say the mom or dad is completely out of it or, on drugs or any of those scenarios or not even there, right? And maybe a sibling, the oldest, let's say, is 7 or 8, and they're having to really take on an adult responsibility of taking care of those younger children too, right? Like, so there's a lot. That's why they call it disorganized, right? Like there was a lot of more significant level, right, trauma that occurred. So once we kind of identify, okay, where are you here, right? And all of us are going to be somewhere on there. Some secure, like I said, if we're blessed enough to have that. But what I've learned in the world, there's a lot of people who don't.
Yeah.
That they're hiding a lot behind who they are as an adult, right? So once we can identify that, then we can kind of start figuring out what those negative cognitions are, right? Like when I was walking you down through EMDR, like I'm not good enough, I'm unlovable, I'm unworthy. And then we start processing, meaning with EMDR. And it's so amazing. I have so many different clients that I've done EMDR with, and they all range, right? Like I have physicians, I have teachers, I've had, all people, students, right? Like all different walks of life. And the thing that I get most is, Tandi, this is life-changing. Yeah. And it is 100%. And so that's why I love it so much, right? Like, because it works, and people get better. And they start living their life the way they were really kind of intended to, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating because I'm sure, like you said, I'm sure we all have some things, some really bad and some not so bad. And, but it's interesting to me how you're talking about how people hold it back and they don't really deal with it. And it's just, my brain starts automatically thinking like, man, I wonder, like, obviously I know a ton of people that are dealing with different things. Yeah. But I also don't know what those things are, right? I'm just making the generalization, but like, I'm like, man, I wonder how that manifests in their life or what's manifesting in my life. Like what stupid, like I have stupid little programs. Yeah. That's what I call them, right? Yeah. It's just these things that I like whether it's letting the gas tank get down to E every damn time and then stressing out for 20 minutes because I live 25 minutes from the nearest gas station. And, just stupid things like, but I think I'm like, man, where does that program come from? Like what in my life or and what programs do I have that I'm not even aware of? Right. That are probably having a negative impact on my life and trying to figure those out. Yeah. I actually think of them. I have a term for them now and I call them threshold guardians. Okay. So, I like that. Of where, so I look at it like, it's not my term. I stole it from, I don't know. That's okay. Somewhere. But I look at different things in my life when I start seeing like habits in my life and I start saying like, oh, I wonder if that's a threshold guardian and that's keeping me from something that I want to accomplish or just a way that I want to be or whatever it is. I'm always trying to look at those things and it's fascinating sometimes, like the stupid gas thing. And that's just an easy example. There's other ones without bearing my soul to everyone on Buying Local here. Get myself a free therapy session every podcast. That's right. That's right. But it just fascinates me about how weird and intricate we are as people and the different things that affect us and have, it's kind of like chaos theory, right? With you got a little ripple here, but as time goes on and you get longer out from that event, like how huge of an impact it can have on your life. That's right. It's just absolutely fascinating. It is. And like I said, my role and my goal and my hope is to help people figure that out, right? And then operate from, I am good enough, so the sky's the limit for me. You know what I mean? And so, yeah. It's funny. I wish I could ask you specific questions, but we get into those rules, those pesky rules for therapy. If any of your patients are listening, they're, fingers are crossed. That's right. Tandi, don't spill the beans. Don't spill the beans. Don't spill the tea. That's right. So tell us a little bit. I mean, you kind of talked about it, but just if someone's thinking about like, oh, maybe I want to reach out, like what does it look like for someone to reach out to you? What does it look like for them to work with you? Sure. Yeah. So my website, right? I have a website that people can go to, setfreecounselingllc.com. And from that website, it has all my services, but it also has a contact me button, right? And then you can fill that out and it will come directly to my email, which is all HIPAA secure, of course. I was going to say, that Proton mail. You got it. That's right. That's right. So, so once somebody reaches out and says, hey, I really would like to meet you, then I'll usually do a phone call first and just kind of fill it out. Like say, kind of what's going on, tell me what your needs are. And then I kind of explain that business aspect that I struggle with sometimes, right? This is the cost, this is whatever, right? So anyway, then we set up an appointment. If they're ready to go, then we set up an appointment. And at that first appointment, it's telehealth, okay? And we're going to
I'm just going to listen. I'm going to meet you right where you are, right? I just want to hear kind of what made you think about coming to therapy, right? Like what's going on. And from that, then, certain questions, and I do some scales. Like I really do like science, and I like statistics, right? Because statistics are pieces of evidence of truth. That is what I'm always talking to my clients about when they're worried or anxious or whatever. Oh, no. Pull out what's true. What is those pieces of evidence of truth? So anyway, going back to that kind of, we just kind of start to build that rapport. And then from that, like I said, I'll go into attachment theory. From attachment theory, then we can kind of figure out where do we need to start. Some people are not ready right out of the gate to do EMDR. They need a lot more coping mechanisms and coping skills, and really just learning how to regulate their nervous system, right? Like, but also some people are okay and they can go ahead and start EMDR. So I kind of determine clinically, right? Like what all that is, and I talk it out with the client. And again, it's always up to the client. I'll present what I clinically think, and usually they're like, yeah, absolutely, Tina, let's do what you think, right? And then we just move from there. Yeah.
Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about the EMDR story you were going to tell me. Do you want to tell me that off the air, or?
No, I can totally tell you on the air.
Okay,
This is a fantastic story.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So my whole entire life growing up, I was terrified of cats. And when I mean that I say I was terrified of cats, I mean like at sleepovers in school, I would make my friends who had cats put the cat away, literally, or I would not come. Like, I can't do it. And so I would freak out, but I never really knew why. I just was like, cats are evil. I don't like cats, or whatever. So. Did
you see that? Was it Stephen King where like the cat?
Yeah. Like, what is that?
The cat sucks the soul out of you.
Oh my gosh. I hadn't seen that yet.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
I do know what you're talking about, but I hadn't seen it at that point as a younger person, right? But yeah, I do. What is that? What is that name? Animal. My husband. Pet Cemetery. Is that what it is?
No, not Pet. There's another one. I don't know if it was a Stephen King thing or.
Oh, okay.
Amazing Stories or Twilight Zone. I don't know.
Yeah.
I remember. Anyway.
Yeah. So, terrified of cats, literally. And so I had just got out of grad school and I was working in community mental health. This is the beginning of my career. And my LCSW supervisor, she was a cat lover. She lived on a farm and she loved animals, period. She would feed anything, coyotes. I mean, she'd feed anything, right? Like it's whatever, right? Like, yeah, you do, right? Like, so anyway, she, outside of our community mental health center, she had, there was like wooded area behind there and there was a bunch of stray cats. So she had put out food and water for these stray cats. So I pull up to go in the morning to work. And the door that I have to go through is full of cats, like all in front of it. God. And I literally freaked out in my car.
It had to have been your worst nightmare.
Oh, it was horrible. It really was. Like, I was like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? Like, and just so anxious. I could feel like all that intensity of those emotions in my body. And finally the cats finished their food and went on. I mean, I literally waited them out, right, before going into work. So I go in and nobody else is there yet, right? It's early. And I start screaming, like flipping out, like, I can't believe who's feeding these cats. Oh my gosh, blah, 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 blah. And so my supervisor, her name is Laura, she came up to me and she said, Tandi, what is wrong, And I said, who's feeding these cats? Like, just so intense, just shaking, right? And she says, Tandi, do you think you might be willing to do a little EMDR? This is a little over the top reaction. She's very calm, She's just like,
it's your business, right? It's what you guys do every day.
Yeah. So she's like, why don't we go sit down? I'm like, fine, whatever, blah, blah, blah. But I'm still thinking you shouldn't be feeding these cats, right? So we go in there and she said, Tandi, this is just so out of your norm. You love fast cars. You do you go shooting, you go four-wheeling, you do all these things. But you're scared of cats? Like, there is something not right? And so she's like, let me do a little EMDR. She had been trained a few years prior. EMDR, actually, side note, didn't even start until the 1990s. So it is not, like, that old, right? Yeah. Like, so anyway, she had been trained. And so she sets me down and she begins to walk me through the protocol of EMDR. And I kid you not, I don't know, I always say 15 minutes, but it wasn't very long, right? She starts doing the tapping. She starts walking me through. And all of a sudden, it was like this light bulb, like just like this, right? Like this light bulb goes off. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I have it. So when I was little, I don't know, my parents would correct me on how old I was, maybe like 4. I was old enough on Saturday mornings, right? It's the 80s, right? Saturday mornings, I can get up, go get my cereal, turn my cartoons on when my parents
Saturday
are still
morning cartoons,
yeah, man.
yeah.
And so my parents are still asleep. Saturday morning, they're sleeping in, right? So that was my routine. So it was a Saturday morning, and I go out to the kitchen, and I see the back door wide open, and I see the contents of my mom's purse like scattered all over the place, and I'm like, that's not right. So I go and tell my parents, they get up and they're like, oh my gosh, we were burglarized, right? Like somebody came in. And so they call the police. And so here I am again. Think about a 4-year-old now. And this is from my little 4-year-old perspective. I'm standing there and the cops are in the living room. And I can still picture this piece. And the cops are talking to my parents and they're like, this guy is armed and dangerous. We have been looking for this guy. And they called him a cat burglar.
Oh, no, really? That is wild.
Isn't it nuts? And that's when the light bulb went off when I was walking.
Are you allowed to use that word?
Yeah, well, I do all the time.
I was going to say, that's crazy.
I am not politically correct probably on a lot of things either. But yeah, like totally crazy, right? Like, because it just went off and I'm like, and I just stopped. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's it. Somehow in a little, remember, you can't externalize as a child. You're internalizing. So somehow cats became armed, dangerous, not okay,
bad,
right? Like just not okay. But then you saw me today. What was I doing?
I know. Well, that's what I was going to tell the listeners.
Yeah.
So when she first walked in, before we sat down, one of my cats came in and jumped up on the thing, and she was petting the cat, and that's how that revelation that there was a story there came about. So.
Yeah. And so from that moment on in my young career, I was like, I have to be trained in EMDR.
So wild.
Yeah.
Something not even connected to an actual cat.
Right.
Right? Like physically
It just
speaking.
got twisted around a little bit in the brain.
In our brains.
Yeah.
Amazing. Man, our brains are wild.
Isn't it? Yeah.
Absolutely wild.
Yeah.
I got like a dozen more questions, but we're already, running up on an hour. I don't want to keep you here all day. If people want to find out more about you, they want to potentially talk to you, how do they find you?
Yeah, so at that www.setfreecounselingllc.com.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do you do any of the social media stuff, or you stay away from that?
Yeah, I'm not a big social media person.
That's smart.
As soon as I start to make more money, Mike, you will be the one that I hire to help me out.
As soon as you ask me to do it, I'm going to tell you not to. So.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I'm going to tell you not to waste your money.
Yeah, no, it's just, social media, it causes so many problems even with my clients alone, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like just the
can't
comparison and all the things. So I really kind of have a negative feed on that.
Social media is not real life. I think about this all the time. I see what I post, what other people post. I mean, we post these things that's like, it's not real life.
I know. And then people go back to their negative cognitions. I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough.
Yeah,
when I'm talking
that.
to
I don't
you, exactly.
It's wild.
Exactly.
And for those of you listening and going like, this guy owns a marketing company, I think there is a time and place for brands with social media.
Yeah.
And I always tell people, if I do see value in them being on social media, there are specific examples, but it's not, 2016, it made sense for everyone to be on Facebook. But now in the current environment, there's so many things out there. It really only makes sense in a very, we'll say a few small examples.
Sure.
So I would tell you not to waste your money on social media.
You know what?
So don't do it. There's other ways
sweat it.
to spend your money that would not be wasteful.
Right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming out to the farm. I always
love it. It's
love
beautiful.
doing it. The Zoom interviews are great too. But I always love the face-to-face is always just a better interview. So appreciate you coming out, taking the time.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thanks everyone for listening. Thanks to our community partners. That list is getting longer, so I'm not going to say them all, but if you're watching on YouTube, you can see the names and logos around the banner. You can also go to our websites and learn more about them. Our community partners, you mentioned Nourishing Minds, obviously they're a community partner. And now I feel like I got to start running through the list. Herzog Law just came on though, Phil.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, very excited to have those guys on board.
Oh,
really
yeah.
great
Stellar.
law firm. Yeah, just good people. Greenwood Hoff recently came on. We've got RASP Incorporated. We've got Performance Industrial. We've got Cerrone Plumbing and Heating. I know I'm forgetting a couple, but I just, really appreciate everything that they do. They make this podcast possible, among other things. So thanks, everybody, for your contributions and what you do in the community, not just on 4-5 Towers Media and our products, but also just for the community at large. So thanks, everybody, for listening. Check us out. You can find us, of course, on Apple, Spotify, Rumble, and YouTube. You can also find us on Glens Falls Business Report and Saratoga Business Report, which we've actually got some exciting news coming up on that front with who we are as a brand and some brand unification that we're going through right now to kind of not be so spread out.
Nice.
It's going to be great for our readers, great for our listeners, great for everyone, realistically speaking. And if you can, folks, do us a favor and subscribe, follow our podcasts. You can do it. You can follow our social media, but I just gave that big rant, so don't worry about that too much. And, leave a review if you like the podcast. If you don't like the podcast, then feel free to not leave a review. Thanks, everyone, for listening, and you'll hear from us next week.